Good morning. My name's Larry Leverett. I am an educator, career educator, public school educator. I've been working in very nearly every position from pre-K teacher's aide in 1965 when Head Start was introduced. I was in the learning environment. I taught elementary school, principal elementary school, assistant superintendent. C and I been superintendent for 3 different school districts. Can't keep a job for over a period of 16 years. Assistant Commissioner for Education, New Jersey Urban Education, and fighting for the kids for equity throughout all those years. Pleased to be here with my friend Lou Smith and his wife Janet Cole, who have provided leadership to the MPLI vision for 21 years and are warranting of all of our just ovation and applause and gratitude for their generous gift of themselves, their spirits, their physical beings, and their ongoing dedication. This morning we're going to talk about mayors. We're going to have 2 mayors from cities that have seen some very tough situations, mayors that have been on the front line, mayors who are leading the national conversation. We have a young brother from Houston, Brian Busby, who's going to come here, who's here this morning, who's one of the 40 under 40 people, young people. Mayor, we got somebody, I have somebody, you young too, to lead on into the next decade. So without further ado, Ramon.
All right, thank you. Good morning, everybody. So just to kind of give you a perspective of the crisis in Houston, I have a couple of videos that illustrate Hurricane Harvey. Once again, just to kind of give you a perspective of the crisis in Houston and the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey, I have some updated information for you. So Harvey is now tied with Katrina as the costliest hurricane on record, inflicting $125 billion in damage. It caused unprecedented flooding, displaced more than 30,000 people, and prompted more than 17,000 rescues. In Texas alone, 103 people died, including one of our local police officers who drowned actually while trying to avoid the rising waters. It's estimated that 25 to 30% of our entire county was submerged, so that's Houston as well as its surrounding areas. The entire city was shut down, as you can imagine. And so this is a before and after picture of one specific location. Mayor Turner also had to impose a curfew, mostly due to looting. As you heard, many places served as shelters, including one of our largest furniture stores, our convention center, and actually our football stadium. Specifically, this picture shows the George R. Brown Convention Center, which surpassed the capacity of over 8,000 people. And as you heard in the video, our mayor decided not to evacuate the city. That would have been, as he said, chaos, and in many cases, impossible. And when I think about courageous decisions, I'm reminded that everybody's going to have an opinion about something no matter what. And it'll be very difficult to change the thoughts and minds of persons who are seated in negativity. And as they say, you can't please all of the people all the time. Correct? All right. So many people had to make some decisions. They had to make choices on who would evacuate first. So many times families were separated, who got to be rescued first and who had to remain behind and wait for future evacuation. Many pets were left behind. An example of some of the dangers included contaminated water, submerged debris that you could not see, and whatever else might be lurking in the water. Houston is very close to the Gulf of Mexico, as you know. But contrary to popular belief, there was some fake news. Somebody in music said, "Don't believe the hype." Points if you know who said that. All right. But unfortunately, this was real. And so in many cases, people would come outside of their front door and actually couldn't come out of their homes because of this danger. And you may have seen in the news, some of the animals didn't know what to do. So we saw some very strange behaviors as well, including this hawk who sought refuge in a taxi cab because the winds were just too high. So in my district, in the Houston Independent School District, all schools were closed for at least 2 weeks, some longer, and then some to this day have not reopened. This shows you some examples of the catastrophe that happened in Houston. This is a school library, and then just one example of an elementary school in Houston. You can see some of the emotion that's visible on the faces of some of our school board members, as well as, at the time, Superintendent Carranza. And I believe this is one of our panel members. Mr. Busby, is that you? All right. Thought I recognized you. However, we were very fortunate and grateful that support started to come in from communities far and wide. One of our local and national celebrities, telethons. And I really applaud the work that our city officials did, including our mayor. I think they were superb. Except one instance when the mayor did not include me or invite me to meet Janet. Another one of our local heroes, if there are any Houston, Texas fans out there, is J.J. Watt, who actually proposed a fundraising effort. And the original goal was to raise, I believe, maybe $500,000. The end goal was that that organization raised $37 million. Unfortunately, some lives will never be the same, as some people still don't have a home to return to. This time last year, we had no idea what was headed our way. And you can imagine the despair, the uncertainty, the overall level of depression that lingered and to a certain extent still plagues many lives today. This time last year, I was attending MPLI, and in the evening, I was watching the playoffs. And we're all friends here, right? So I do feel compelled to express my sincere condolences to Yankees fans. But we actually needed this championship. We needed this win to kind of overcome the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey. And you cannot imagine the level of pride that this championship really brought to our city and to our citizens after such a catastrophe. Even though we lost some of the most fortunate of us, we only lost 2 weeks of school. Our district actually decided to give us a day off in November in order to attend the championship parade in Houston, and so that was very nice. Like many other cities that face adversity, Houston is committed to rebuilding, of course, and for the most part has done so. And that led to one of our current mottos, which is Houston Strong. And I just want to mention once again that Mr. Brian Busby is a part of this panel to kind of give you a broader perspective As Chief Operating Officer of the Houston Independent School District, he was very instrumental in making some of the tough decisions that our superintendent and our board had to make. And just to kind of give you an idea, with his leadership, he oversees over 7,000 employees, which includes construction and facility services, bus transportation, nutrition services, and risk management, just to name a few. And so that is our presentation on the fury of Hurricane Harvey and the crisis that we underwent in Houston. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We can invite the rest of the panel up to the stage. Rest of the panel, please.
So Ramon, thank you for sharing the tragedy of Harvey in Houston and spotlighting the leadership of your mayor, the town's mayor. What I'd like to do is to have each panelist to briefly introduce themselves as opposed to a two-tier introduction system. So beginning on my left with Mike Spencer, former mayor. Singer, former mayor of Charlottesville, Virginia. Michael?
Well, it's great to be here. That's a lot to follow, both that speech by Al Pacino and then, so I'm not going to do that. I am a very proud graduate of majority-minority public schools in Arlington, Virginia, and it's really an honor to be here with you all. I served as mayor for 2 years of Charlottesville. We have a system of government where the mayor is selected from within the city council. I was elected to the city council in 2015 and then came on and became mayor right in my very first meeting. And then decided to nominate a woman who got elected, the first African-American woman mayor of Charlottesville, who is now serving, and I'm still on the city council. City council is a part-time job in Virginia. We've got a citizen legislator form of government, and so in my day job is I'm the VP and general counsel of a technology company that builds apps for a bunch of very cool companies around the world. And I teach at the University of Virginia as a lecturer, and I've got a couple of 3-year-old boys who keep me and my wife very busy.
Thank you, Mayor Baraka.
First, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Always great to see you, Lou. I'm the mayor of the city of Newark, the 40th mayor, serving in my second term. Just was reelected in May of 2018 this year. Was an educator, am an educator, still. Been an educator served in every position possible. Public school, substitute teacher first. Then a regular school, elementary school teacher when we had to teach everything. When we taught everything, math, science, English, history, the whole thing. Then became a vice principal. And from vice principal, I became a principal in Newark Public Schools. For 22 years, I was an educator, a union rep, the whole thing. And now I am, the mayor of the city of Newark. And, I'm proud of it. There's a lot of work for us to do, and I look forward to getting involved in the discussion we have here today.
Great. The educator mayor, the true education mayor. And Mr. Busby, Chief Operating Officer, Houston Independent School District.
Correct. Again, my name is Brian Busby, as Ramon mentioned. Been with Houston Independent School District 20 years. Started out of high school after several jobs. Started as a custodian in the district and worked through various channels, not intending to get to this level because it wasn't a goal, but I've been very blessed to work around a lot of people. My wife also is a 20-year veteran of the district, Dr. Busby, down at the front. And so we together are educators as a labor of love. So this is our district, our city, and this is what we do. I have 3 daughters, 21, 8, and 5.
All righty. So you have 2 full-time jobs, at least. And Ramon, would you like to further comments?
Sure. Once again, Ramon Moss, principal of Carnegie Vanguard High School in Houston. I just completed 27 years in education in Houston ISD and my 14th year as principal. Carnegie Vanguard is a small high school for all gifted and talented students. And although we weren't directly impacted structurally by Hurricane Harvey, of course, we did miss some significant time from school. I invited Mr. Busby to speak on behalf of our district because he has such a broader and a global perspective of how we've been able to recover.
Thank you very much. We've had the opportunity to hear Al Pacino talk about his perspective on the role of the mayor in times of tragedy. We've some footage on the Hurricane Harvey. And tell us a little bit about your defining moment or that you've experienced that enlightens us to the difficult challenges, the courage to make difficult decisions that impact the lives of your community.
Who's first?
You
Mayor?
are- Yes. Mayor Baraka.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll go, but
Wow, it's been many, I don't know if there's one defining moment. I think every day I have to make a difficult decision. I think the most difficult decision for me was to leave being a principal at Central High School, where we put in a lot of work and a lot of effort to transform a school, to leave that and become the mayor of the city of Newark. It was an economic decision for me. We made more money as a principal, as a matter of fact. It was a kind of decision of leaving those kids and their families and think about the larger issue in terms of being able to lead the entire city to do the things that I thought should happen. It was a risk that I took, and I did it. And I think that it turned out for the better for all of us. But ultimately, I think that was one of the most difficult decisions that I made in my career, was to leave education that I've loved and still love for 22 years.
Have you really left education, Mayor?
Well, it's nothing like being a principal of a school, I'll tell you that. And I think most of the things that I've learned, to be able to move the city forward, I learned as a principal. I mean, people don't understand the kind of work that you have to do as a principal, and how it relates to larger kind of skills that you would need to run anything, as a matter of fact. I'm not there. I don't have the immediate kind of gratification of seeing kids develop, grow, and all of those things. Most of the things you do as mayor, there's years behind the kind of groundwork that you lay before you even see any real kind of results of the things that you're trying to do, especially against a system that's been in place for centuries before you even took office or power. That's for sure.
Mayor?
Well, we have found ourselves in Charlottesville at the crosshairs of some pretty significant social, political crises and tensions that are happening in our country. How that's happened has been a story unto itself. I can go through it very quickly. There was an effort that began a couple of years ago we're a progressive southern city. We're 85% Democratic. We voted for Bernie Sanders instead of Hillary Clinton. It's a college town, but it's built on top of a legacy and a kind of buried history of systemic racism and structural discrimination and massive resistance and Jim Crow and urban renewal experiments that ruined a lot of lives and hurt a lot of people, and a lot of hurt feelings and a lot of injury that has not been dealt with. So, and a lot of that has come to roost with, we have these Confederate statues that were put in place in the 1920s that have a very mixed reputation in town, very, very complicated way that people of all races think about them. But the issue of what to do with the Confederate statues brought up a whole bigger effort, which was how do we change the narrative and tell the full story of race through our public spaces in Charlottesville. And that opened up a whole host of other ways, positive stories that we tell, what the parks were named, there was a African American cemetery that had fallen into disrepair that is right off of our downtown mall that we put almost $100,000 toward renovating. So as we started to do this work, that put us on the map for a bunch of forces in the country that I believed and felt very strongly about speaking to, had been emboldened in this political time to step out and say, we don't want the narrative change, we don't want the full story of race told, things are fine, and this is not how we make America great again. So these forces kicked into action and started making Charlottesville a target. And the more discussion there was about telling the full story of race, the more we became a target for white nationalists who wanted to make us ground zero for that cultural political fight. And that goes back before the event that all of you know about, which was August 12th, the Unite the Right rally. There were two other events in the course of a very bad year, which was 2017. There was a rally earlier on in the year in May where a guy named Richard Spencer, who founded the term alt-right and runs a white nationalist group called the National Policy Institute and was a UVA graduate, he had gotten linked up with this local blogger who fancies himself a leading white supremacist voice in this crazy time that we're in on the internet. And they had also another UVA graduate, and they had sort of hooked up. And there was a rally that was called at the base of the Robert E. Lee statue that we have, where 100 of these buzz-cut, khaki, white button-down shirt-wearing guys came and had tiki torches at night around the base of the Lee statue. And it was an image that kind of leapt to national consciousness. I made the decision then, and you got to keep in mind the way that the mayor is in our system is we have a city manager who runs the police, and we have the mayor doesn't have any role in a lot of the operational functions of government. I mean, almost none of them. You're the chair of the policy-making body, which is the city council. You pass the budget, you do public intake, you make policy. But you know, our job is to speak to the people and to talk about policy and to be a voice. But there's a lot of gray area in how a mayor does that job in the council manager form of government, which is what we have. So that was a moment when I felt very strongly that we needed to repudiate this as vocally as we could. And I did a statement about we're a welcoming city. We had done a lot of work with religious toleration with immigrants in the months before this, because when the Muslim ban was announced, we're a city that, in addition to being progressive in all the ways that I talked to you about, we have a major office of the International Rescue Committee that brings over 100 Muslim political refugees to resettle in our city every year. And we love that. That's one of the most rich, diverse part of our heritage. And these people become our neighbors and work in businesses, go to our schools, and infuse our area with a ton with just all the richness from the countries they come from and their political stories. So we had done a lot of work to resist these incursions on religious liberty, which in Central Virginia, we have a very proud tradition of religious liberty. It goes back to James Madison and Thomas Jefferson and the Declaration of Religious Freedom and the Memorial and Remonstrance against religious assessments, and it's a big deal where we are. So the city was already kind of pretty ready to declare our values in this era. So I felt very supported in saying that we're a welcoming city, but such hatred is not welcome here, and calling out this for reminiscent of the KKK. And then that, you know, if you talk about moments of choice, I became a target of, I'm Jewish, and I think probably the first Jewish mayor of Charlottesville, at least that we know, hadn't made a big deal about this. I don't tend to talk very much about my own, faith or even a lot of personal issues in public. I just don't. I don't know. But had started talking about it a little bit, and then I became the target of unbelievable anti-Semitic trolling campaigns that a lot of other Jewish public officials and journalists have experienced in this day. And I don't think it's paranoid to say that a lot of this was connected. You know, you even saw some of the sites of some of the you know, in Poland or Eastern Europe. I mean, there were troll farms that were unleashed on me, and I received just to give you a couple examples, a cartoon that somebody had taken the time to make of Robert E. Lee pushing the green button of a gas chamber where my face had been photoshopped into it with a Star of David on my lapel, which actually got it wrong because I'd been on the other side of that vote, because we had a blue ribbon commission there was minority that had done 6 months of public hearings, and it actually recommended that the statue stay within the city borders, but that it be recontextualized. It's a very complicated issue with many nuances, and there were a lot of local sentiments about different ways to handle this, and I had voted on the other side of recommending recontextualization. So anyway, cartoon makers aren't known for getting nuance. But, you know, I got a voicemail on my phone of a just audio clip of Hitler. I got some very well-crafted letters that, you know, that people had sent to my home address. I had a call with the FBI, had, you know, the Anti-Defamation League opened up sort of a case file, very helpful, supporting. And throughout all this, you know, you really have to make a decision about how are you going to speak about hatred and bigotry in our country at this turning point. And also, you know, I think that for any public official, it's a little sobering because, you know, there are things that we do and there's things that we say. You know, we try to do as much as we can. A lot of the time, you know, I have a fairly humble attitude about how much we all, you know, spat a lot of hot air all the time, and it's like, you know, what do you do? I mean, you know, something like what happened in Newark with getting the schools under the control of the city, that's doing something. But words, you know, words do matter. I think if people do look for what are the principles that their elected officials have at a time when so much is at stake. So that was the backdrop. We then had a visit from a North Carolina branch of the KKK that came in June, and that opened up a tremendous number of dilemmas for us as public officials and the leaders of the city. We led a campaign that I was very involved with to start a group called Unity Seville that set up a whole slate of alternative events, and the message from the police chief and the city manager on down was, don't take the bait, because it was about 30 KKK members. You know, I mean, I joked that this like isn't even legitimate KKK. This is like, you know, like Marshall's KKK. There's like knockoff KKK. It's called the Loyal White Knights of the Ku Klux Klan out of North Carolina that decided to come to Charlottesville to get celebrity. And one of the ideas was, let's deny them what they're looking for. But what I'm trying to learn and get some wisdom from the very difficult enterprise today of dealing with these cross currents around us. There were a lot of people who didn't like that message from the city. They wanted to bear witness, they wanted to go and confront, and hearing from city leaders, don't take the bait, to them felt like it didn't attend to their need to be present when these groups that I really wanted to just give the back of the hand to and deny them the celebrity they sought and the controversy they sought. So it led to a very challenging circumstance, and I was very proud of what we did set up. A lot of people went to these alternative events and spoke, learned about unity and hatred in our country, but very, very difficult to get the right call. And then that all led up to the Unite the Right rally, which was we became the site of a terrorist attack. There were two different waves of this. There was an invasion of the campus of the University of Virginia on Friday the 11th that set the stage for this incredibly violent event during the morning of Saturday the 12th. The city commissioned an independent report later on by a law firm that documented a lot of security choices that could have gone better, and that I think cities around the country are going to learn from and try to study, is how do you deal with instances of civil unrest like this. But on the other hand, I think that what the city did and how we were able to speak about this really proved a galvanizing moment for our country reckoning with, they saw the violence at the heart of the alt-right. They saw it for what it was. And that is proving useful. A school, the deputy head of the school board in Prince William County, which is one of our most diverse counties, was at a roundtable with me recently, and she said, Charlottesville was the best thing that ever happened to us. And it blew my mind that she would say that. But she thought that it provided the spark to truly educate about the dangers of intolerance, and that people saw hatred and violence for what they were today. They saw how real it was. And so if you have that view, that history moves one step backward and two steps forward, I think that we're moving two steps forward, but it's caused a lot of pain. So I think Charlottesville is right at the crosshairs of that.
Thank you. Thank you. Two stories, two mirrors. We had the opportunity to view very quickly, get an overview of the mayor's role in Houston. With HISD being severely impacted by Harvey, what was the intersection of the mayor's leadership with the responsibilities of the school to address the breadth of issues that you had to deal with quickly?
Well, Houston is a little different because the school district doesn't fall under the responsibility of the city by role. It has an elected board, but in the time of a natural disaster, the mayor essentially becomes dual commander-in-chief with our county commissioner at the time, and it still is Ed Emmett. So we yield to what the mayor's decisions are about where Red Cross will deliver to, about where we would set up our organized shelters. So we all kind of worked in rhythm to that. But as a school district, having 310 facilities, of which 20 of them were open as refuge of last resort, we had to be very resourceful in how we set those up. Also, I'm over police, so we had to set up police officers that stayed through the night at all these locations. But we also had to become, as Ramon mentioned in some of the clippings, shelters for non-HISD residents, non-HISD students. We opened up feeding stations for the community. So you saw a lot of people that don't even live in our area but were dislocated and relocated due to Harvey, come in and just get basic essentials, things for little girls, things for little boys. You saw people wearing clothes that didn't fit because they were the only clothes available to them at the time. So it was truly eye-opening because Hurricane Harvey was not discriminated by socioeconomic background, race, faith, or how you vote. It was simply a hard-hit disaster that took everyone by surprise to a different level.
Okay, thank you. So let's think a bit about the mayor's role in education and public education. There are many examples: strong mayor, weak mayor, city manager-driven mayoral structures, charters that give powers to mayors, and other charters municipal charters that try to limit powers. School districts operate separately, independently. In other cases, they are controlled, mayoral controlled. A lot of models have been tried. When it comes to your communities, what is the model that is in place, and how is that model working to provide the mayor with the opportunity to be a contributor to educational improvement, systemic educational improvement initiatives in your respective communities?
Well, we're like the Houston Independent School District. We have an elected school board. The mayor has no direct authority over the school district, but obviously the mayor is the chief executive officer of the city. So whatever happens in the schools affects what happens in the city. And so it's incumbent upon the mayor to have a very vocal and very assertive role in what happens in the school district before there's a disaster, right? So we have to be involved, and we believe in community schools anyway. So we think that we have to have a very, very, very kind of robust role in the development of our young people, the development of pipelines from schools to careers, the development of making sure that there's systemic after-school programs, pipelines for kids to move from wherever it is that we think that they should move from in terms of kindergarten, early childhood, to high school, to university, and onward. So we create City of Learning collaboratives where we try to increase the number of Newark residents that actually attend these universities in the city and outside of the city, resulting in Rutgers University, Newark, increasing its enrollment of Newark students by 60% in the last 2 years. We believe that it's important for the corporations and the private sector community to be engaged and involved in creating opportunities and job growth for young people. We went from 1,000 to 3,000 kids being hired in the summer and around school year by many of these corporations. So we have to have a direct and very assertive role in what's happening. We can't be separated by the fact that, the mayor doesn't control the schools. And even though there's an argument that mayor controls schools, around the country, other mayors tell me that it's better. I believe in an elected school board because I believe in more democracy, not less. So I think that we should have an elected school board. While I do believe that there should be some opportunities for mayors to have folks that are engaged in the school board, whether it's higher ed community, public sector folks, to engage the school board in kind of creative ways to bring resources, I do think the ultimate decisions that are made should be made by the parents and the people in the community about what should happen to their children.
So how does that work with, how does the mayor's role interact? How did you interact with the transition of the district from 20-plus years of state control when not only was the mayor isolated, but the community was isolated from the decision-making process in schools?
Well, before I got there, I was involved in kind of protest. I was a principal, activist in the community, so we were involved in years and years and years of struggle, trying to return local control back to the residents of the community. I actually became mayor, and one of my platforms was we were going to get the schools back under the control. I wasn't clear on how we were going to get there, but I knew we was going to get it done, right? So, I worked hard to make that happen. Part of it, and this is another decision that I had to make, I was invited to go to Trenton to have a conversation with then Governor Christie. I was inclined to deny because I had one other meeting with him prior to this, and this was, Senator Cory Booker at the time called me, and he's still a senator, called me and said, you should actually go to the meeting and
Actually meet with Mr. Christie?
Yeah, he told me that you should go because I think the time is right to get some things accomplished that we've been trying to get accomplished for a long time. And he said a few things to me on the phone, and I thought about it and said, I'm gonna go to the meeting. So I went down there, and he basically was trying to tell me, get me to agree with who his superintendent pick was, right? And I was in a meeting, and it occurred to me that he doesn't need me to pick the superintendent, right? He can pick whoever he wants to pick, right? That he didn't call me all the way down from Newark to Trenton, somebody who's fighting with him, to help him pick the superintendent, right? He didn't need me to do that. So in my mind, I was like, why is he really calling me down here to help him pick the superintendent? Obviously because maybe a month or so before that, kids had barricaded themselves inside of the school building. All kinds of chaos was happening down there. So he basically wanted some of that stuff to go away. And my position was at that time was I don't care. I told him I don't care who you pick as the superintendent, right? All I want is local control, right? So because my idea is like slavery is wrong no matter who the master is, right? So at the end of the day, I don't care who you could pick. You could pick somebody we love or somebody we hate. That's your choice. My choice is local control, right? So how do we create? You don't have to do anything but create a space for us to get to local control. You create that space, stay out of our way, create that space. We'll move into local control the way we need it. and we'll deal with the superintendent. Why? Because we've dealt with the one before that, and the one before that, and the one before that, and the one before that. We've been dealing with superintendents. The bad thing is when I came from there, folks who were, a lot of allies, lost, they were not completely faithful in it. Because one, they don't believe Christie's, they thought he was a liar. Two, which is not far from the truth. Two, they thought that I should have opposed Chris Cerf becoming the superintendent, who eventually I worked with very closely to make this happen.
Yes.
And I had to come back and explain to people that that's not what I went down there for. I didn't go down there to pick a superintendent because I didn't need to go down there if I was going to pick a superintendent. Right. What I did was create a beginning for us to get where we are today, and it came true. So thank God for that.
All right, great. And mayoral leadership was absolutely essential to pushing that issue forward. The nation watched Charlottesville and with shock and horror, and the depth of impact on the national conversation of race lasted for more than 2 or 3 media cycles. The observation that you made at the end of your earlier comment regarding the opportunity for the schools to build a conversation on race, to have discussions that were not previously embraced. How has that developed? How does that play out in terms of educational opportunities for historically underserved children who are enrolled in the Charlottesville schools? What's different?
Well, we have a different form. We have a separately elected independent school board. Also, the mayor, city council have virtually no role other than the budget. Budget's a big deal, and we do. One of the things I was proudest of in the 2 years was we increased. We have a benchmark of 40% of the budget, and we were able to increase it significantly beyond that both years and have a discussion about what was going to go into it. And we're now doing a whole separate school infrastructure capital budget, which we have not done before. And that's also, in the technical, arcane, super important parts of local government, that's going to be a really big deal because it means that we're not kind of getting these back and forths on like an individual, track request. Anyway, that's not really your question, but I think
It's a good answer.
Charlottesville, I think, means 3 things, 3 different stories. The first was the reveal of the violence underneath the alt-right and the emboldenment of these fringe forces that never had been invited into the public, into the mainstream, under the spotlight, and by ever before, and they were invited by a mainstream political party and a mainstream presidential campaign and welcomed onto the stage. And so the nation saw that in Charlottesville. That's one meaning. The second one was these really unfortunate difficulties with the policing strategy, but as I said, I think that we are going to learn from that. I think the nation will, about how to deal with civil unrest. The third was a kind of curveball consequence of what Charlottesville was. So we were invaded by white supremacists and haters of all different stripes. And in the months to follow, it's very traumatizing for the community, horrible, raw, very difficult, a lot of anger generated at every leader, anybody in the city, me, everybody else. But I'm reading a book by Barbara Bradley Haggerty of NPR right now called Reimagining, Life Reimagined. Really good. I recommend it. It's for about midlife transitions. And she has a whole part in it about post-traumatic growth, which is a whole theory that I'm learning about here, which is different from post-traumatic stress. It means that after trauma, it can be very difficult, but you stretch and you react and you grow forward with the pain and with the difficulty and with the rawness. And in that direction, what happened in Charlottesville opened up a very profound new focus on equity. And not just race, but a lot of focus on race, but the race income nexus. There was a whole new focus on saying these people came here to terrorize and intimidate a progressive city, and the most vulnerable among us by otherizing us, and the way that we can respond to that is by refocusing on equity as a city that cares about that. So there's been a whole new focus on affordable housing, a whole new focus on an equity lens. We made a decision recently to almost triple the housing credit that you get on your taxes to deal with gentrification. So if you're low income, you live in one of the housing tracts one of the census tracts where your housing taxes are going up because of gentrification, your property bill is almost wiped out now for the second half due to this new focus that we have on equity. And I don't think things like that would have been possible if it were not for this invasion by white nationalists. So I see it in that lens.
Thank you. So, education is the passport to the future, and the future belongs to those who are prepared for it today. Malcolm X. When you look across your respective communities, whether it's Houston, Newark, Charlottesville, are all children, particularly children who have been historically underserved by public schools, are all children being provided with the passport that will enable them to be successful in the future? And if not, what is the role of the mayor in facilitating that vision for what potential our kids can hold? Houston?
Well, I think in Houston, being probably the second or third most diverse city in the country, we have a 77% free and reduced number in terms of what our student population has from household data. And I think we identified right before Superintendent Carranza came on board, who's now the Chancellor of New York, the great need to address our grossly under-resourced campuses in certain areas of town. And those under-resourced campuses, data showed targeted black and brown students. And so when we did that, Superintendent Carranza created the Achieve 180 program that now Superintendent Lathan has heightened, where we've seen our first indicators that with additional resources, additional teacher preparation, and Ramon can jump in because I don't know all the educational terms, I'm on the business side. We've seen state testing scores go up, well, local testing scores go up ahead of the state level in terms of what we're doing on growth. We've also seen teacher retention raised as a result of it, because to work in these schools, which they used to call it back when I was in school, combat pay, you get higher pay and stipends to work in those environments. But I think the stark contrast has to do with our sustainability of leadership. And I think when we saw our superintendent, who's again now the chancellor, leave, it sent a message throughout the city, throughout the district, that Houston, for lack of better terms, we have a problem. Because Mr. Carranza, who's a good man, did not leave because he was forced to go. He left because he didn't want to deal with the headache of an electedly Democratic board. He wanted to have one central point of direction, which is the mayor of the city of New York. But what Superintendent Lathan has done in picking up where he left off has really taken us to new heights, and also identified some key sustainability factors. She's went back to where the heart of education begins, at the local perspective, which is the school principal. She's found out from the principals what each individual likenesses is for their schools, for how their kids learn. And then she's taken away the cookie cutter approach, I would say, to how the principals resource out what they do, and had a heavy concentration on how to attract and make more equitable the resources for the students to learn.
Ramon?
I would just add that equity is the key word. And there, in Houston ISD, there's a spotlight on equity and indicating or showing what some campuses have and then what others don't, and kind of creating some sense of a balance.
Thank you. Mayor Baraka?
So the answer is no, right? So there is a series of uneven education in this country, and it's been this way forever. It's completely and totally uneven. Not just uneven in resources. In the state of New Jersey, Abbott versus Burke proved that funding schools through property tax was inherently unequal, and it created two-tier school systems where people were economically segregated as well as racially segregated. And that's what mostly happens around the country. I mean, even 50 some odd years after Brown versus Board of Education, 70% of African Americans still go to school with predominantly other African Americans in this country. So segregation still is live and well. It's now we're just not segregated by race, we also segregated by class. So you're talking about schools that have very little resources, but also they're segregated based on cognitive demand, meaning what are we asking kids to do? What are you asking them to accomplish? What are we giving? What are we putting before them as their task? Segregation in courses, segregation in curriculum, segregation in pipelines to move kids, from where they are in elementary school to the college, and even in schools that are supposed to be more advanced, there's segregation in those schools. So you have districts outside of the one in Newark, in the county, who are more progressive school districts, but those kids are segregated inside the school. So those things, in terms of courses and other, so those things are difficult. Then on top of that, there's a serious level of poverty. Poverty is traumatic. It causes trauma. And he said post-traumatic. See, the problem with our children is that there's never a post. Right, it's just traumatic, right? So there's no post, it doesn't end. So when we can't be defined as a post-traumatic stress disorder, because post is out of the question. We need another definition for how we're defining kids that are growing up in very traumatic situations based on poverty, based on violence, based on inequity in their lives. And so the mayor's job, which is huge, is to try to create systems or create systems in spaces where systems do not exist, or create systems in place of systems that already exist, right? So when you're building something, you're destroying something at the same time. And so we have to create pipelines and opportunities for young people to become smart enough so they can survive a system that's inherently designed for them to fail. But then when they finish, create an alternative system to actually destroy the one that they went through. And that's heavy duty. So I'm going to stop, but I have two jobs as the mayor. One is to keep people alive long enough so that they can actually, be progressive, be a good citizen, be a part of the country, and then make them brilliant and smart enough to destroy a system that's based on inequality. So those two things, and those are very, very, very hard things to do.
One more term? 3 terms?
I don't know, man. I have to get through this one first. Then invite me back in 3 more years, I'll let you know.
All right. Mike?
Well, just to add on to that, I see the job as telling hard truths and making hard decisions. I want to thank you all for what you do, because especially now, the public schools are the greatest engine we have of social justice. We know that particularly in the South with the history we have of segregation academies, where a lot of people just opt out of the public schools. And so the folks who either have to or choose to send their kids to the public schools, it is a labor of love, and it's one of the most important things we do to keep ourselves a pluralistic, equality of opportunity country. And I know that because that's my history. Everything that I do is shaped by going to an elementary school where whites were in the minority, and we had like 20 different languages, and it was 20% African American, 30% Latino. And it was an amazing experience. I believe in every fiber of my being that diversity is the source of prosperity and of Americanness. So we need to get as many people having that experience, and we need to make sure that the public schools are well-funded, well-supported, that the arguments for them are robust, because they are under assault right now, and I think we're seeing that from the federal level as well as at the local level and the state level. So, you know, in my mind, that's what we do, and I think there's another, there's mayors, whatever form of government you are, their job is basically of leaders right now, which is there's a lot of hard truths that people need to hear. You know, one of them is that, you know, in cities that are in demand, there's some cities that aren't, but there's some, you know, Charlottesville has a very intense pressure right now, and we have a big debate about housing, and a lot of it is about supply and demand, and people don't want to hear a lot of the time that if you don't have enough housing, then prices are going to go up, but then when you improve more housing, that looks like gentrification, and it's a very tough debate, and I find myself a lot of the time having to try and explain without sounding like it's a lecture. We have a supply and demand problem, folks, and we're going to have to increase supply of housing. Otherwise, people really are going to be pushed out because it's going to become totally unaffordable to live. Things like that, I think, are really important nowadays, and that's, you know, it's also just like the economy. I totally agree. I mean, if you've got $500 in your bank account and you're living paycheck to paycheck, your reality and the reality of your kids is just stressed.
Yes.
And so one of the jobs of leaders is to try and make the economy produce more for people, however, wherever you can. And I know that that's one of the things that we've got the lowest unemployment rate in Virginia, and we're very progressive, and we really do work hard at having the economy create benefits for everybody. But it's you know, it's tough work, it's a hard slog, but there's nothing more important.
And we are very, very fortunate to have two world-class mayors providing leadership in their respective communities, and two fine educational leaders who know how to work with mayors to get the job done for our kids. Thank you each for your contributions to this panel. I'd love to ask how this all plays out in a populist environment coming out of Washington, but the time is up, and we'll have to come again next year after midterms.
One minute. Are you dismissing the class?
I was attempting to do so.
This will be the 7th time this week. You ought to go down to the principal's office. Oh, my goodness gracious. First, I want to thank you folks. We have a little ceremony here, as some of you know. It's called the T-shirt giveaway. But before we do that, I'd like to make a comment or two and ask you one final question. This is magnificent, by the way. You're authentic, you're knowledgeable, you're persuasive, but that doesn't happen that often. So my question is, why doesn't it happen in other cities, in particular, because it's a focus, in schools? What gets in the way of real change unfolding?
Okay, I'll
50 seconds or less.
I'll try to say really, I think the two most dangerous currents right now in our political culture are rage and cynicism. And I think that it is very hard work to stand against both of those, because they both corrode and they destroy, and they also are very seductive. It's very easy to be very angry. It's very easy to give up hope on institutions or almost anybody that used to have trust. And I think that people who stand against rage and cynicism, it's like really tough work, because you have to try and be deliberate, and you have to be calming, and you have to try to educate, you have to listen, you have to believe that democracy can produce results, you have to believe that institutions deserve trust, and you have to do that work while trying to get that trust. I like that work, but it's a lot easier here. But there's nothing more important, so that may be what you're resonating. I find that mayors and senior administrative officials who actually are charged with doing things believe in all those things almost more than anybody else, because they are within the institutions that have to do the work, that have to get the trust. So that's why these conversations are the best, but we need to bring more of it
everywhere.
I would say the lack of courage is, what stops people from doing what they know should be done. Even when they know it, you have to have the brilliance to build a plane, but the courage to fly it, right? So at the end of the day, I always say that to young people is like, I have a lot of smart people that work with me, just not a lot of people that have courage. So you have to have a little of both. You have to have the brilliance, but you also have to have the courage to actually do those things that you think of. It's easy to pontificate and argue and debate in an academic setting about what's right and what's wrong. The difficult thing is to actually try to get it done or knock on somebody's door who you know disagrees with you. So that's incredibly important. It takes a lot of courage to get it done. And so we should be teaching courage. James Baldwin said the children who grew up in the Third Reich learned to be barbarians, right? So teachers, meaning he put a lot of emphasis on the power that teachers had in civil society. Teachers create kids and they make kids brilliant and they make kids creative, but we also have to give them courage at the same time.
Thank you, Mayor.
Well said.
Ed?
Brian?
Well, the mayor quoted James Baldwin, I'll just quote James Brown. In the words of James Brown, saying it and doing it is two different things. That's right. So I believe, as our commissioner says, student outcomes don't change until the adult behaviors do change.
That's right.
Ramon?
And so as leader of a campus, when I think about decision-making, I really think about it in three different ways. Some of the simple issues that arise, I can make that decision autocratically or individually. And many times, the second one is I'll go to different consultants or key stakeholders and gather their input and still make the decision myself. But what I try to yield to mostly is the group decision-making process so that everybody feels that they have buy-in and they can express their voices and their opinions. But many times, I think with that process, it's time-consuming, and I'm the kind of person who likes to see happy. And sometimes that can kind of get in the way. And as I said earlier, I have to remind myself that you cannot please all of the people all of the time. And sometimes I think that becomes a barrier towards providing change. But you certainly do have to have the courage to kind of step out on that limb and say, okay, well, ultimately, I made this decision, and this is why.
A round of applause, please.